Vietnam has been ASEAN's fastest growing economy in the last few years. And one reason for that has been its bamboo diplomacy and its approach to foreign policy. But things have gotten a lot more challenging under the Trump administration.
In this case, if Trump wants to pull the tablecloth off the table, the Vietnamese cutlery get broken. Trust is something you build up over a long time, but once you break it like that, it's hard to build it back.
As Vietnam sends a team to Washington to negotiate, China doubles down on its diplomatic efforts. During President Xi's visit, it was announced that work will soon begin on a high-speed train connecting Vietnam to China.
自2004年起，中国是越南第一大贸易伙伴。自2016年起，越南是中国在东盟第一大贸易伙伴。
Could this mark a fresh new chapter in complex Vietnam-China relations?
The mistrust of China is still there, so it will not disappear overnight just because of problems Mr. Trump is creating for Vietnam.
On the outskirts of Vietnam's capital city, Hanoi, lay a profound environmental challenge. A huge landfill receiving 71,000 tons of garbage a day. But thanks to Chinese technology, the trash can now be converted into energy enough to power a small city.
Nhất là những công việc của đám ấy, thì nó bấu đen gần như trên mặt tất cả các thực phẩm mà người ta bày ra để mời khách ấy. Đấy, nó rất là mất vệ sinh. Khi có một cái nhà máy như này để cho thành Hà Nội là một cái thành phố xanh sạch đẹp.
就我们一天产生的量，现在目前产生的量，以每户14度电来算的话，可以提供10万户居民的每天供应量。
In recent years, China has been supporting Vietnam and other ASEAN countries in their transition to clean energy. It's just one example of the investments flowing from Vietnam's northern neighbor. Vietnam-China ties are deepening. Work will soon begin on a high-speed rail connecting Vietnam's capital Hanoi to Kunming in China. Trade is also fast expanding.
中越双边贸易额连续4年突破2000亿美元，2024年达到2606.5亿美元。 同比增长13.5%。
All this despite well-publicized differences between the two nations in the South China Sea. But will Trump's tariffs put a strain on the China-Vietnam trade relationship as Hanoi is forced to crack down on transshipment? Or will it push the two communist countries even closer together? The bamboo plant, a common sighting in Vietnam, which holds an important lesson on how the country should conduct its foreign policy with its giant neighbor, China.
So bamboo diplomacy refers to the characteristics of the bamboo tree, which is very popular in Vietnam's rural areas. It has strong roots, stout trunk, and flexible branches. So here they use the bamboo metaphor to refer to Vietnam's foreign policy approach, which is firm in the protection of its national interest. And the flexible branches refer to Vietnam's flexible ways in pursuing its national interest. In the past, Vietnam had a troubled relationship with China invading Vietnam multiple times. So Vietnam was firm in defending its sovereignty by standing up against China invasions and driving away Chinese invaders. But after the wars, after peace was established, Vietnam reached out to China, to Chinese ruler, to settle the differences and to establish peace between the two countries.
Vietnam's economy has been on a roll. In the last 6 years, it has averaged 7% annual growth, outpacing peers like Malaysia, Thailand, and India. Its bamboo diplomacy is one key reason. Vietnam has attracted investments from the US. It has also partnered Japan to build huge industrial parks near Da Nang. It has also drawn in investors from China.
China and Vietnam are neighboring countries. We share a very long land border. Therefore, to move some manufacturing capacities from China to Vietnam is, first of all, very logical because the two countries are bordering with each other, and we can move it back and forth very much with ease. And then in terms of the two populations, we can really interact with each other, understand each other much better than between and among many other countries.
Vietnam is at the doorstep of China. There have been many wars over the centuries, the most recent of which is the 1979 conflict, when China invaded over a period of a month and then withdrew. This was the last war that China fought. China has also been a source of tourists, trade, and investments in recent years.
We have a lot of common interests in, economic cooperation, in political cooperation, but some differences in strategic objectives, especially in the South China Sea, where Vietnam and China have a vast, a lot of disputes over the sovereignty of the parcels and the spratleys, as well as the maritime jurisdictions in the South China Sea. So while Vietnam tries to promote economic cooperation with China and political and cultural cooperation as well, Vietnam is ready to stand up against China in the South China Sea. But of course, for now, Vietnam prioritizes economic development. So Vietnam wants to protect its economic cooperation with China from disputes in the South China Sea. So here, Vietnam tries to compartmentalize the dispute from the overall relationship with China.
Vietnam's foreign policy has attracted much attention amongst the global South countries. For example, it was the only country in the world that held friendly high-level meetings with the leaders of America, Russia, and China over a period of 12 months. A testimony to its success in managing great power relations.
Well, Vietnam has since the late 80s, pursued a policy of multilateralizing and diversifying its foreign policies. And countries like Australia stand in awe because Vietnam was twice the unanimous choice of the Asia-Pacific bloc in the UN as its candidate to be a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. And twice it was elected by overwhelming majorities from the Asia-Pacific group. What I get at is what Vietnam is saying, you can trust us never to ally with anybody. We're the center of the universe. All of you put equity in Vietnam and you'll be rewarded. We won't go with anybody, and we play a positive role in every multilateral institution, and every country will look up to us as being an honest broker in the affairs of the world. And then you can't touch us then because everybody will complain. That's tariffs.
But international relations have become far more challenging under President Trump.
Vietnam scrambling to buy more U.S. goods, including security and defense products, as it tries to bargain for postponement to 46% U.S. tariffs due to hit tomorrow.
The United States is Vietnam's largest export market, with a value of $142 billion, or nearly 30% of its GDP. President Trump's 46% tariffs on Vietnamese products made Vietnam one of the countries worst hit by the proposed levies.
In this case, if Trump wants to pull the tablecloth off the table, the Vietnamese cutlery get broken. Trust is something you build up over a long time, but once you break it like that, it's hard to build it back.
Within days of President Trump's tariff announcement, China President Xi Jinping made a trip to Hanoi. President Xi called on Vietnam to jointly oppose unilateral bullying and uphold the stability of the global free trade system. China and Vietnam signed 45 different cooperation agreements during President Xi's visit across areas like infrastructure, AI, trade, clean energy, and the digital economy.
I do believe we belong to the same geographical region, and we shared many things, for good or bad, across the ages for thousands of years. And now we both face the tremendous amount of challenges for continued development. And in both countries, we need to continue to reform and opening to the outside world. So these common themes bond us together. So maybe China and Vietnam can compare notes, try to come up with some common strategy, and coordinate their activities, not only between the two countries, but also in terms of other international organizations, or even in terms of their respective relations with countries like the United States or EU.
Responding to the visit, President Trump said that China's talks with Vietnam are intended to, quote-unquote, screw the United States. Strong words from the president, don't you think?
I think that's a very strong opinion of Mr. Trump, but it may not be true if we look at the nature of the relationship with Vietnam and China.
But do you think this statement also sort of reflects the difficulty that ASEAN countries have when they say that they don't want to choose a side?
Despite the rhetorics that the major partners are not forcing smaller countries to take sides, I believe the pressure is there. They want to at least push countries in the region into certain lines of actions or certain course of actions that they want to see. So I think the challenge is common for all countries in this region. So Vietnam must be very careful in walking a fine line between the two powers. And Mr. Trump's comments signals that act of balancing is now becoming more and more difficult for Vietnam.
For decades, Vietnam has pursued a foreign policy strategy centered on carefully balancing relations between major powers. Evidence of this can be found in the infrastructure designs of its two largest cities. Hanoi's first metro system was built by the Chinese, while the metro in Ho Chi Minh City was built by the Japanese. Hanoi, Vietnam's capital and second most populous city, is crowded. Getting from one point to another can be a challenge in rush hour, something that millions of residents have had to endure. In November 2021, commuters had some reprieve. Line 2A was the first line to be operational. Built at a cost of $868 million, mainly with Chinese funding, it covers 13 kilometers and has 12 stations. Some staff were sent to Beijing for 6 months of training.
Thành viên đó là một lái tàu của tuyến đường Cát Bà Ninh Long. Nên là với bản thân mình là một người trẻ tuổi, thì em cảm thấy điều đầu tiên là em thấy tự hào vì là một cái công nghệ mới, một là phương thức vận hành giao thông mới.
It takes 23 minutes to cover all 13 kilometers through some of Hanoi's busiest districts. The same journey takes about 1.5 hours by bus during peak hours and over 50 minutes by motorcycle. There are ongoing discussions to extend the metro system further. in Ho Chi Minh City, thousands of residents crammed into train carriages on December 22, 2024, as the traffic-clogged business hub celebrated the opening of its first-ever metro line. Huge queues spilled out of every station along the $1.7 billion line that runs almost 20 kilometers from the city center. This project was funded largely by Japanese government loans and uses Japanese technology.
Em vẫn rất là hứng tại vì kiểu lần đầu tiên được đi, tại vì em đã coi nhiều cái trên mạng á, tại vì ở nhiều nước khác thì cũng có rất là nhiều chuyến như vậy. Thì đến bây giờ thì nước mình mới có, em cũng rất là tự hào.
Ông chờ cũng khoảng 10 năm từ bắt đầu xây dựng. Ông thấy là xây dựng từ đây đi ra, ông đi bên ngoài, ông thấy là đến hôm nay là rất thoải mái rồi để đi trải nghiệm cái tàu này.
There are two railways in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City can be seen as an example of Vietnam's efforts to diversify its foreign partners to avoid reliance on any single partner for its own security and economic development.
The Chinese-built Hanoi metro system was just a taste of things to come. China has been building massive railways across Southeast Asia, like the $7.3 billion Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail in Indonesia, the $6 billion China-Laos Railway, or the $10 billion Malaysia East Coast Rail Link. And work will soon begin on a rail link to connect Hanoi all the way to Kunming, China. In February 2025, the Vietnamese parliament approved plans for an $8 billion rail link, which will stretch 390 kilometers from the port city of Haiphong to the capital city of Hanoi, through the mountainous city of Lao Cai, and onwards to China's Yunnan province. China will provide some funding through loans for the project.
The importance of the trade relationship between the two has grown so intense and so important that lorries and truckers just are inefficient and costly. So by taking the port of Haiphong and linking it with Lao Cai on the China border, you connect to southern China. Goods can move both directions, and with proper vetting and quarantine inspection, a train can go whooshing right through, unlike the lorries that have to stop.
I think connecting with China is like really embracing all the opportunities in China, either in terms of selling products, fruits, agricultural products to China market, accessing directly the 1.4 billion people, or, for example, bringing Chinese manufacturing capabilities down to Vietnam, bringing Chinese money investment down to Vietnam, promoting people-to-people exchanges. And I think the Vietnamese connectivity to China will lay the solid foundation for the next wave of Vietnamese economic transformation.
Whether in investments, major infrastructure projects, or trade, China is a crucial partner in all these endeavors and more. But Beijing and Hanoi also have a long-running dispute over the South China Sea, causing Hanoi to seek out other security partners. On 5th August 2024, the Vietnam Coast Guard arrived in Manila. They joined the Philippine Coast Guard in bilateral maritime exercises in the disputed South China Sea. It's the first exchange of its kind for both forces, an event the Philippines described as historic. A week after the joint exercises, Vietnam's President Tô Lâm made his first official visit to China. During the visit, China and Vietnam agreed to boost exchanges between their two militaries at all levels, including border, naval, and Coast Guard exchanges. But just weeks later, the Vietnamese government issued a statement accusing Chinese law enforcement personnel of assaulting 10 Vietnamese fishermen at sea.
Officials in Hanoi have accused Beijing of having what they call brutal behavior. And it all follows a recent incident relating to a confrontation with a Vietnamese fishing vessel in disputed waters. According to Vietnam's foreign ministry, Chinese law enforcement boarded the boats near the Paracel Islands and hit several fishermen on board. They allegedly also confiscated their fishing equipment. Now, Hanoi says that Beijing's actions seriously violated its sovereignty.
Some incidents are reported, some are not. It depends on how Vietnam, wants to leverage such incidents, to send out messages about its relationship with China, especially towards China and towards the domestic audience.
Less than 10 days later, Chinese Premier Li Qiang met with Vietnamese president and other leaders in Hanoi to discuss how to improve bilateral relations.
It seems that there is a pattern of warm exchanges between the two national leaders, followed by differences erupting in the South China Sea. It's something that we see quite consistently, isn't it?
Friendly exchanges followed by flare-ups in the South China Sea is something typical of the relationship between Vietnam and China, and it also reflects the dual nature of the relationship that is both cooperative and contentious. Vietnam has strong ties with China, especially in the economic domains, but there are also tensions in the South China Sea due to the disputes between the two countries there. Major incidents in the past include the standoff between Vietnam and China over a giant oil rig in Vietnam's EEZ in 2014. There were anti-China riots in Vietnam that caused vast damages up to, I think, $100 million when rioters targeted Chinese factories and burned them down.
But what about in recent years?
In recent years, no major crisis. Over the past 5 years, China has given Vietnam quite a relaxed time, perhaps because they wanted to maintain good ties with Vietnam in the context of their strategic competition with the US. They want to keep Vietnam closer to its side, and perhaps they also were busy dealing with the Philippines. But of course, Vietnam understands that it's just a temporary lull and tensions may come back anytime.
China and Vietnam are neighboring countries. We share a very long land border. China and Vietnam already signed the land border treaty, meaning we no longer have any land territorial disputes between China and Vietnam. And this in itself is a huge achievement in itself. On the other hand, yes, there are territorial disputes involving quite a number of islands, shoals, reefs, etc., in the South China Sea. I do believe these two countries will have enough political wisdom to prioritize their development goals and to avoid any flaring up or escalation of tensions involving any of these disputed territories.
Both sides, when the high-level leaders meet, basically say in coded diplomatic thing, this is the major irritant in the relationship, but we don't want to let it become the dominating one. They have subgroups, expert working groups on the waters in the mouth of the Gulf of Tonkin or this or that. Nothing ever gets done. But the way I would put it, if I could go to a Politburo meeting and be one of the speakers, say, comrades, this is as good as it gets with relations with China. Let's get on with the big picture.
Vietnam and China have been deepening their trade ties.
自2004年起，中国是越南第一大贸易伙伴。自2016年起，越南是中国在东盟第一大贸易伙伴。中越双边贸易额连续4年突破2000亿美元。
China has also been an important investor for Vietnam. Cumulative Chinese foreign direct investment in Vietnam over the last decade is $61.3 billion. making China the fourth largest foreign investor in the country after South Korea, Singapore, and Japan.
Vietnam has tried very hard to maintain equidistance between the US and China, but do you think Trump's tariff policy will push Vietnam closer to China?
Maintaining a balance between the major powers is a cornerstone in Vietnam's foreign policy, and I think Vietnam will try to maintain that principle as long as possible. So the tariffs will constrain to Vietnam's US relations and will perhaps hamper the potential for further cooperation between the two countries going forward. But I believe that it may be a temporary setback only because both countries are still important partners to each other. And at the same time, Vietnam also wants to avoid reliance on China, whether in the economic or in the strategic domains. The mistrust of China is still there, so it will not disappear overnight just because of problems Mr. Trump is creating for Vietnam.